Hello folks, next week sees the launch of the War Within's next content patch 11.05, which means if you're somehow currently running out of stuff to do in game, then there's a ton of new stuff coming as the game's 20th anniversary event kicks off. This PTR cycle has been uncommonly quiet, with the last new PTR build over 2 weeks ago. But with that event being pretty chunky content-wise, we may be about to enter an exceptionally busy phase in-game, similar to that feeling that we had during the times of Mock's Remix. Despite that lack of activity on the PTR, we did get the official patch notes for 11.05, which mostly just covered what we already knew, but with one nice little addition that Blizzard helpfully highlighted. Yes, very soon we're going to be able to solo the Shadowlands raids. For solo mount and transmog collectors, this is a really nice little surprise, as at least in recent expansions, Blizzard had been waiting until the end of the expansion to do these passes over old content to make them soloable. Clearing old content solo or with a mate has been a very popular pastime for many players for the longest time. The developers' reluctance in the recent past to open it up sooner has been mystifying to me, as it was basically leaving some potential content to keep players engaged with the game lying on the floor. The mention of BFA raids is a little bit surprising, as they already had a pass in 10.2.7 and at least in my experience were already fairly easy to solo. But there is no doubt that a pass was needed for Shadowlands, with quite a few fights that were either completely unsoloable or required very specific classes, especially Mythic difficulty. These changes won't make the raids trivial to solo, especially in Mythic difficulty, as the bosses will still have a lot of health. But fellow creator So Breezy did check this out and found that with the exception of a badly bugged Kel'Thuzad fight, which hopefully will be fixed before it goes live, they were all doable with Season 1 gear. Once I've had a chance to test this out in live, I do plan to put out a couple of video guides to run through things and highlight the rewards that it's making available. If you want to know when those will go live, do make sure to hit that subscribe button so that you get a reminder. If a new patch along with newly soloable Shadowlands raids isn't enough content to be getting on with, believe it or not, next Friday also marks the start of the Hallowed End holiday event, which means that if you haven't already got the Headless Horseman's mount, then you'll probably want to mark your calendar, because I feel like it's going to be super easy to forget about it amongst everything else. But that's for next week. Let's dive into what's been happening this week. With this week's reset, players were finally able to gain their first dose of the new long-term raid buff, Severed Strands. As it turned out, this was a bit bugged, displaying a 0% increase in damage and healing. The good news is that Blizzard soon confirmed that this is only a visual bug, and that the intended buffs, which they confirmed to be 2.25%, are actually being applied. The visual issue is going to be fixed next week with a new patch launch. This wasn't the only issue with the new system though, with reports of some players getting more than the intended possible 16 Nerebar finery, and others getting into a state where they didn't get the full amount they were due. Blizzard have also confirmed that fixes for these are on the way, with those who got the extra not able to turn the excess in, and in a separate hotfix, those who missed out should now have the full amount. So if that was you, you might want to check your currency tab. Moving on to Mythic Plus, and there's been a little bit of a surprise on the Affix front. As we have had a one full rotation of the new 4 Xal'atath Bargains affixes, we had expected to see the Ascendant buff this week, but instead we got Oblivion, which is the one that sends orbs towards the boss that we need to soak. Most likely, this is intended to make sure that the +2 affixes get mixed up with the +4 tyrannical and fortified rotation. So I think it's now very likely that we're actually facing an 8-week affix rotation rather than the expected 4 weeks one. But I guess we'll have to wait and see. The Affix also got a little bit of a tweak to ensure that when the orbs don't have an enemy to follow, they will now follow players instead. I had noticed some weird behaviour with these orbs in the previous week, with some ending up just sitting around in odd locations and dungeons. So I guess this is an attempt to resolve that behaviour. Another affix that's getting a bit of a tweak for the future is the Voidbound affix, where the Kiss part is being changed from a 50% cooldown reduction and a 15% healing taken buff into a 20% versatility buff along with a 30% cooldown reduction. After last week's nerfs to Zekvir, which no longer grants progress towards the Great Vault, it appears this wasn't enough to stop us all farming him to Blizzard's satisfaction, with a further nerf this week, which now means that Zekvir will only grant crests and Valor Stones on the first kill of the week. It was fairly clear after last week that Blizzard did not want us to feel like we needed or wanted to farm Zekvir, so this is probably not a massively surprising change. But with crests being capped and Valor Stones being so easy to get, I suspect I'm not the only person who is perma-capped on them. I'm not really sure I see the point of doing this as well. That is, unless with last week's change to drop Aspect Crest from Mythic Plus 8, this has been leading to folks seeing it as a fast way to also cap out in the ruined crests. Another more positive nerf, I suspect, is a bunch of tuning changes to Queen Ansurek, especially in Mythic difficulty. This is a follow-on from last week's changes to some of the other Mythic bosses, and almost certain to be a continuation of the process of adjusting the Mythic raid away from targeting the race to world first towards some more mainline cutting-edge guilds. At the time of recording this, there are only 12 guilds who have managed to defeat Queen Ansurek in Mythic difficulty, and it's starting to look like this raid may be going to go down as one of the most difficult raids in World of Warcraft's history, which is kinda surprising given the comments from Blizzard around Sepulchre of the First One's difficulty. With the general consensus from the player base being that Mythic Plus this season is also much harder than the norm, I do wonder if this is an intended move by the developers to move the goalposts for the game as a whole upwards. If so, given the response to the Mythic Plus season, which has been broadly speaking fairly negative, I'm not super convinced that it's been the right decision. But this is certainly going to be something to watch, both to see the WoW team's response to current feedback, but also how the next season will evolve. Something that's very much become part of Blizzard's overall strategy for World of Warcraft is the release of a new 12-month subscription offer towards the end of the year, and this week saw the launch of this year's version of that. If you're a mount collector, this will no doubt be super enticing, with a total of 3 mounts. The star for retail players is the Star-Touched Feline, a much darker take on the Sunworn Feline from a few years ago, along with another flying owl mount, the Charming Courier, and continuing the trend of previous 12-month subs, the gigantic Gurlock Murloc mount. There's also something for classic fans, with a new Lava Drake mount and a swoopy owl pet. As a fan of Drake mounts, I'm kinda sad that the Drake isn't also in retail too. And it's not just those 3 mounts. As always, the 12-month offer will include the 6-month sub mounts as well when they drop. And Blizzard have confirmed that the next 6-month mount will, as always, be themed on the Chinese New Year, which means most likely it's going to be a serpent-based mount, and that will be arriving by the end of January. If you're currently on a 12-month sub, which is set to auto-renew, you're also going to get these mounts by the end of October. Now, if you're 100% sure you'll be playing for the next year, this is a pretty decent offer, as it does also have a slight discount on the normal monthly sub price, but a year is a long time to commit to the game. And with the launch of next week's patch, the 2024 roadmap is coming to an end, and we've yet to see a 2025 roadmap, which if Blizzard follows the pattern of the last couple of years, we won't see until mid-December. In my view, asking players to commit to a full year before sharing any plans of what Blizzard plan to commit to for us is at best a little bit cheeky. And if you were as cynical as I am, you might wonder if there was a reason for that. Now, in all honesty, I personally don't think there's any reason to be suspicious. Last year's 12-month offer came out before BlizzCon, and that turned out to be still pretty positive. That said, if you're not 100% sure that you will want to play for the next year no matter what, my personal advice would be to consider waiting to see what does get announced in the next few weeks and or months. Blizzard did say earlier this year that they are planning a Warcraft Direct event towards the end of this year, and we're likely getting into the time frame when that will happen or at least be announced. The 12-month sub offer tends to stay around for at least a few months, if not year round, and if they do pull it, we'll likely get some notice. So if you're not in a rush, there's no reason not to wait and see what you think of any of the new announcements before you commit. Finally, on the retail front this week is a bit of juicy speculation for lore fans. This section doesn't include any true spoilers, but I will be discussing some observations from the PTR, so you have been warned. The weekly quest this week was to collect 100 Titan discs in return for a little bit more exposition from the Isle of Dorn archives recording of the Titan Archivon. This came with the revelation that the Titans' attempts to dig into Azeroth to study the World Soul were impeded by colossal chunks of crystals, which they realised were parts of the World Soul's essence. While not completely spelled out, the very clear implication is that Beledar, that crystal in Hallow, is one of those chunks of crystal, which is a bit of a surprise. The mystery of what Beledar is has gone through quite a few iterations, with the first idea that it was the tip of Sargeras' sword quickly debunked by Blizzard back at BlizzCon and reconfirmed by the Hallow leveling campaign, and the most prevalent idea had been that it could be some kind of Naru object. Perhaps a crashed Naru ship with even some Naru inside. I guess that particular theory has also now been put to bed with a much less interesting explanation, but it still may be a hint of something more to come. I guess that has been put to bed now with a much less interesting explanation, but it may still be a hint of something to come. As I reported last week on the 11.05 PTR, there are some goblins discussing finding a mysterious island with a special crystal on it that called to them. I had been wondering if this could have been the top of Beledar above ground, but now, given this, I'm wondering if we are about to find another Beledar-like crystal. Having giant, what are basically Azerite crystals embedded in the pliant, swapping between light and void phases doesn't sound good for Azeroth either way. And I have to wonder where all of this is going to be taking us next. But what about all of you? Do you think that this is a hint for the next patch? Are we going to be helping goblins mine even more Azerite? Is that going to go as well as it did back in BFA? Let me know in the comments down below. Now, I haven't been covering Classic very much of late. With the launch of the new expansion, my own personal focus has been on retail, and in my view, both Kata Classic and Season of Discovery have kinda faded a little bit, at least hype-wise, but there are a couple of interesting bits of speculation on the Classic front that may be giving us some hints of what may be coming. The first are some pretty persistent rumours that Blizzard might be planning to launch fresh hardcore classic servers in November. These rumours seem to be stemming from large streamer Sodapoppin, who announced a delay to his planned classic event until November for what he described as a very good reason. Does this mean that some large creators have been tipped a nod and a wink from Blizzard? Well, your guess is as good as mine. But there's no doubt that Hardcore Classic brought in a lot of views to Classic, even if it did not translate to the highest player numbers, and it might be one way for Blizzard to perhaps attempt a little bit of a shot in the arm for Classic. If Blizzard were to launch hardcore fresh servers, I would personally be very surprised if they did not at the same time also launch some regular fresh servers as well, and I do suspect that could be a lot of interest to Classic fans. But that's not all. Data miners have discovered in the Cataclysm Classic PTR game files a couple of new mounts with a distinctly Mists of Pandaria feel. One's called the Sha Tiger and the other the Sha Serpent. The obvious next step for the Classic would be Mists of Pandaria, which might point to these being possible bundle mounts. Blizzard have launched bundle mounts for previous Classic expansions after all. While Cataclysm Classic didn't get the attention of previous iterations of Classic, probably not a huge surprise, Mists of Pandaria does have the potential to be a lot bigger, and the MOP Remix event earlier this year will only have whetted people's appetite. Putting all of this together, the likelihood of a Warcraft Direct soon, possible fresh Classic servers, and now a MOP Classic, it does kind of feel like some pretty major announcements for the future of Classic are in the offing. If you've found this week's update fun or just informative, then please let me know by hitting that like icon. And if you want to support the channel or just to know when new videos go live from me, then also make sure to subscribe. There's a load more World of Warcraft content coming real soon, and that's without the TM. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.